Good morning, everyone. Today we will discuss important international groupings that are G7, G8, and G20. These groupings are certainly different from other organizations. So, the groupings are informal and they take decisions based on the consensus, and they don't have any permanent secretariats like in the organizations, for example UN, IMF, etc. These UN, IMF, they have permanent secretariats, but informal groupings or these international organizations, they don't have any permanent secretariat, and they take decisions based on consensus by all the countries that are part of these groupings, and these decisions were not binding. These decisions are not implemented by any agreement. They don't come together in the form of agreements. So they are informal, as I said so, and but apart from being informal, they are also important in international economic system and policies. So let us discuss this international groupings of G7, G8 and G20. First, we will discuss G7 countries. G7 consists of G means it's a group. So group 7 countries, or we can call informally it because these are informal groupings. So G7 consists of countries like developed countries, and these all are democracies. So consists of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and US. So out of these 7 countries, 4 countries are from Europe. So that are UK, Italy, Germany and France. Other countries are US, Canada and Japan. So it consists of majority countries that are democracies, and also these are developed economies at the time of the formation of these G7 members. So we will discuss G7 in detail. G7 consists of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK and the US. So we have to remember the names of countries that are part of G7. They are important for examination prelims as well as GS paper 2 mains examination in IR. So we have to remember what is G7, what is G20, what are the countries that are part of it. So we can say it's an intergovernmental organization, but there is a certain difference that G7 have with other organizations. In the start of lecture, I have told the other organizations like UN, IMF, they have a charter, an agreement for all the countries that become part of that organizations. If India needs to enter, India needs to sign an agreement to be a part of UN. So whatever the decisions that UN take, if India doesn't implement that decisions of UN, for example, then India will attract punishment in the form of sanctions. So but in the G7, like these organizations, these are generally called groupings or coalitions of various countries, but they don't have any agreement while formation. They don't have any binding force. Binding force means they don't have any legal force to implement the decisions that are taken by all these members. So a country is up to its decision, up to its freedom. It can implement or not implement the decisions that are taken by these informal groupings. And one more difference from the other organizations that these groupings have is they have permanent secretariats. Organizations like UN, IMF, they have permanent secretariats or headquarters like in New York. But these G7 groupings or G20 or G8, these groupings doesn't have a secretariat or a building. They don't have a permanent workforce to work the various modalities of the working of these groupings. They only have representatives or individuals assigned by the individual nations for doing the work in these groupings, but they don't have any permanent members or organization, if like buildings to work for the working of these groupings. So it's an international intergovernmental organization that was formed in 1975 as an informal forum to discuss pressing world issues. So in 1975, these organizations have been formed. This informal grouping have been formed in 1975 to discuss the issues that are present in the world during 1975. So it formed in 1975. That is why in 1975 these are the important and developed nations of the world. So that is why these organizations, these member countries are important. That is why they have formed in 1975. So we cannot say now UK is a UK is most developed country. We have developing country, we have developed countries like China as well. But at the time of 1975, these are only the countries that are developed. This group doesn't have a formal constitution or a fixed headquarters. The decision taken by leaders during annual summits are not binding. These are the special characteristic features of a grouping. They don't have a formal constitution or a fixed headquarters, and the decisions taken by the annual summits can or cannot be implemented by the nations. There is no hard fast rule like you have to implement. A country need to implement the decisions. They can take the decisions collectively, but implementing it or not, it is up to the freedom for a country. It is up to the up to its own decision of a country. So G7 is formed during 1973. 1973, you have to know what happened in 1973, why immediately this organization or grouping is formed. So in 1973, there is an oil embargo or oil crisis for all the developed nations that I have discussed, like Italy, Germany, Japan, UK, France, etc., and US as well. So the countries US is have been involving in the affairs of Middle Eastern nations of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. So these are the countries in the world, the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Libya, etc. They have huge oil resources. So all the developed nations of other parts of the world except Middle Eastern nations, they import oil from these Middle Eastern countries. But when the US is involving in 1970s in the internal affairs in the times of Cold War in 1970s, these countries what they have done is, as a group of Arab nations, they are Arab countries or Muslim countries in the Middle East, they took a decision not to export the oil for these countries. So what happened, because oil is not exported, their manufacturing has been stopped and their economies have been stopped. So they have immediately formed a meeting. These developed countries immediately formed a meeting to discuss such oil issues and shocks that are affecting them. From that time, all the countries, Canada have also been added, Italy is added, Japan is added later, and they are from that time, from 1975, they have been holding annual summits to discuss the pressing issues or especially regarding their economies. So this is the logic behind how the G7 is formed. So the G7, we can say, actually it's an outdated group. Now there are other countries that are more powerful than Italy, that are more powerful than UK. So it's an outdated group. It is formed in 1975. Outdated means outdated members. US is powerful, but there are other countries that can be a part of this grouping. So G7 nations meet at annual summits that are presided over by leaders of member countries on rotational basis. So each and every year, one country from G7 nations will head the grouping, and the hosting country will decide about the issues that are need to be discussed in that summit. So it's an informal gathering that lasts 2 days in which leaders of member countries discuss a wide range of global issues. They can discuss about any issue that is concerned for the world, like economy. They can make decisions that will impact those economies. They can't make decisions for non-participating countries. So the G7 members cannot take a decisions regarding Africa. They can take the decisions how their economies need to collaborate, how only that seven nations need to do anything about economy, like that. They can also discuss another important issues like poverty, etc., and also they can discuss about climate change, whatever issues that are. But they have been formed because of economy, and their main priority is economy. So the groundwork for summit, including matters to be discussed and follow-up meeting, is done by the Sherpas. Sherpas as is an important term. It means a representatives that each and every country that are part of this grouping will assign. So a country UK will assign an individual member to discuss what are the issues that need to be discussed in G7 meeting. So they don't have any organization or permanent building or permanent secretariat to work for this grouping, but they have assigned people or a task force. So that is called Sherpas, who are generally personal representatives or members of diplomatic staff such as ambassadors. So these ambassadors are assigned from the countries. They do hold the work before the meeting. They advise the leaders on what important issues that they need to discuss in annual meetings. This is how G7 works. So we'll understand the significance. G7 consists of powerful countries. Even now, some countries are powerful in G7. Even at the time of 1970s, these are powerful countries. So G7 is capable of setting the global agenda because decisions taken by these major economic powers have a real impact. So whatever the decisions are taken by the G7 grouping, they consist of major economic powers. So whatever the decision that is taken by the members, that decisions will reflect in major organizations like UN, IMF, or World Bank. So in fact, it is like a precise group that will take decisions collectively because it consists of developed economies, and those decisions will have a huge impact and say in the world economy and policies, as well as organizations like IMF and World Bank will take these member countries decisions in their workings. So it is how they have real impact, and easily whatever the decisions they have taken, those decisions will be actually taken by organizations like IMF and World Bank, and that are actually accepted and implemented by those organizations. So this is how the working of G7 is, and that is why this G7 is important even now. Thus, decisions taken by G7 are not legally binding but exert strong political influence. So, these are the powerful countries. They take the decisions based on the consensus. It means all countries come together and take the decision. And though they don't have legally binding, it means countries can implement or not. But they have a huge influence, strong political influence, because US is a powerful country. And in organizations like IMF and World Bank, where US have a huge say, so the decisions that are taken by G7 also has a huge say in the Western countries dominated organizations like IMF and WTO or World Bank. So this is how significant the G7 is. So we have to remember the G7 summits and how they are important, as well as how G7 is important to India and how G7 needs to be expanded. So G7 consists of countries that are developed. So they make the decisions that have huge impact in other organizations like UN. So the decisions that are taken by these nations have a huge say for other countries as well. Because US is one country that is dominant in world affairs, that is dominant in international institutions like UN. So whatever the policies that are discussed or underlined by these nations will become automatically the issues of other organizations such as IMF, etc. So the G7 leaders are creating a wide gap between haves and have-nots. So because these countries doesn't take the underdeveloped nations like Africa into consideration or Middle East into consideration, they don't take their own problems, like their own problems they are grappling with, malnutrition, etc., or climate changes. That is why they don't have there is a huge gap between haves or developed countries and not developed countries that are have nots. So as a result, they are making the fight against elevating poverty more difficult. So they want, what they discuss, these developed nations discusses, they want a free trade. They want their trade to be benefited. They want economic development. They want the world economy to get developed. But at what rate world economy is developing, how much inequality is there in the nations, these countries are not concerned with other issues. They want only global GDP. They want the economy. Until unless economy is very well, they don't have any concern regarding other issues, like one country is developed, other country is not developed. Some countries will develop, but that will reflect in global GDP. Other countries that are not developed, that doesn't reflect in global financials or global GDP. That is why there is a huge difference between haves and have-nots, and if they don't discuss such issues like poverty, then it will be difficult for countries, for the world to fight against poverty, malnutrition, or climate change, etc. So what these criticisms have been saying is they need to have more representation from other countries as well, like Africa, like India, etc., where G7 has huge say in world affairs, world politics. Whatever the decisions that are taken by these leaders will have a huge implementation. They will discuss about many issues in the world, and these issues will automatically become important for the world. So G7 gatherings tend to attract thousands of protesters. Many protesters claims the G7, which have no representation from any African, Russian, or Middle Eastern nations, is completely outdated. These are the major criticisms, as I have told, and they have no other representation from other continents. And protest groups also use the worldwide platform as a stage to lobby campaign on issues that are important to them. So they also ask these G7 nations not only to concentrate on certain issues but also other issues that are concerned for other countries. So these are the criticisms that are leveled, that are against the G7. They have to get expanded, they have to have other representations as well, and they have to discuss more broader issues. So how G7 can be made more effective? So they have to work towards implementing tax models for rich individuals and corporations to pay their fair share of tax. So the MNCs that have been operating from countries like UK, from countries like India, suppose a multinational company that is investing in India, they have to pay the tax. They have to pay the tax for countries like India. Many times what is happening is countries, these MNCs or multinational companies, which are subsidiaries of original companies that are present in UK or developed economies like US, they will come and invest, do business in countries, take benefit out of it, but they doesn't pay taxes. Then that is a huge loss to these countries. And in these countries where there is so much of poverty, inequality that cannot be reduced without these MNCs paying taxes, what these MNCs does is they have double taxation avoidance agreements. So what is double taxation avoidance agreement is in a crisp way I'll try to explain you. So in a double taxation avoidance agreement, it means a country need not, a MNC not country, a multinational company need not pay taxes in both the countries. It means it can pay either taxes in their own mother country, or the country where they have been formed, or in a subsidiary country where it is doing business. Either they can pay in UK or they can pay in India. What they have these DTA, what with double taxation avoidance agreement, these MNCs are doing is they have been paying taxes which are in which country that is less. So they have been paying the taxes in countries like Mauritius, etc., where taxes are very less, like 0.5%, where the tax is 0.5%, they are paying there, because the countries like Mauritius, etc., they provide these corporations with a huge benefit to pay taxes, and there is a double taxation avoidance agreement. So they shift their capital to less tax paying economies like Mauritius, and they don't pay taxes to countries like India. So this is what happening. So what G7 need to do is G7 need to form the rules to avoid this misusing the double taxation avoidance agreements, and they need to make these MNCs to pay taxes, at least a good fair share of the taxes to the country, so that they can benefit out of this. So consider how new and existing wealth taxes could be used as a tool to fight poverty in and inequality. So if they make the rules for this MNCs, where these MNCs come from, majority of multinational companies that invest in countries like Africa and US come from these countries. So they have to make the rules and laws that make this MNCs more effective and will benefit the countries like India and others. So they need to invest in healthcare, education, and provide aid to developing countries as well. So they have huge profits, they are developed, so they need to help, they need to make the policies, because whatever the decisions they take, even if they are not implemented, they will have huge say in IMF and World Bank. They can directly ask IMF to give more loans to countries, because US has more say. They are called Western institutions or Bretton Woods institutions that are formed by US. So they can actually provide or invest in healthcare and education in developing countries. They have to work towards limiting greenhouse gas emissions down to zero well before mid-century. So these countries also need to implement policies, because they are developed, they are once in 1950s they are industrialized, so they at least need to fall. Because of them the climate has changed actually, because all they are industrialized, they polluted the world with their development. So they need to pay regarding climate change. They need to work towards limiting greenhouse gas emissions, at least in their countries, because in developing countries development cannot be stopped. If development is stopped because of climate, then these countries will not develop, and there will be issues like poverty. But in the case of developed nations, already because of their industrialization, already they have exploited energy resources, and they have polluted countries, they have polluted climate. So these countries, there is no question of poverty. There is poverty, but they are well developed, they can take care of that poverty without greenhouse gas emissions. But in developing countries that is not possible, so they have to work towards greenhouse gas emissions, and they also should need to implement international commitments like Paris deal to limit the greenhouse gas emissions, or to reduce the global temperature below 2 degrees centigrade. US is a one country that have rejected Paris climate deal when Trump is there. So these countries need to implement the international agreements like Paris deal that is signed in Conference of Parties in 2016 to limit the global environment below 2 degrees Celsius. So these important decisions need regarding climate need to be implemented by these developed nations. So India had attended the G7 summit of 2019 and France as a special guest. So G7 summit is not only attended by those G7 countries, they can also invite other countries to participate. They are not a members. And one more thing you have to remember is European Union will be a permanent invitee. It means European Union always will be taking part in G7 summits, but it is not a member. It is not a member that is added. It will have a representation, but it is not an enumerated member. So India has attended the G8 five times as a special guest by various hosts of G8 summit in the past also. So India have been invited and attended the G7 and G8 summits. So what India is saying is India also want to be a part of this G7 and G8 summits where there is a huge save for this countries. So we'll discuss what is G8. It is very easy. G7 plus 1. It means the countries already that are part of G7. There is one more country that is added to G7, that is G8. So that one country that is added is Russia. So G7 plus 1 is Russia. But into the it has been added in 1997 after Cold War is over, after the fall of USSR, where Soviet Union is disintegrated with the countries. So Russia after 1997 has been added in G7 as a G8. So G7 plus 1 is G8, and in 2014 what happened is Russia annexed a part of Ukraine, that is Crimea. So because of this annexing Crimea in Ukraine, these countries have expelled Russia from this group, and again this G8 has become G7. So that's it about the G8. So now we'll discuss G20 countries as well. So the G20 is an informal group of 19 countries and the European Union. So European Union consists of 28 countries that are economically become a union of 28 countries, that is called European Union. So it is an informal group like G7. It is not an organization, but we can call it as an organization. But it is not a proper organization like IMF, UN. It is same as G7. So it consists of countries like 19 countries and also UN, and it has also representations from IMF and World Bank. G20 membership comprises a mix of world's largest advanced and emerging economies. So it's not like G7 which only has developed nations during 1980s. It has representations from advanced and also emerging economies have representations. It is more important because India is also a part of G20. India is not part of G7 or G8. India is part of G20. So it represents about two-thirds of world population. So two-thirds of world population is represented in G20 because it consists of 20 nations, majority of countries that are part of European Union, that are part of G20. So it has a huge say. So 85% of global domestic product belongs to these G20 nations. It means almost majority decision making or majority advanced countries, emerging economies will be a part of it. So G20 is a broader group than G7. So 80% of global investment will be happening in these 20 nations, and over 75% of global trade among these nations. So it has a huge size in economy as well. So it's a broader group, and we will see how it is different and what are the nations that are part of it. So the origins of G20 is in 1997 to 1919. There is Asian financial crisis. So what happened is, in 1973 there is an oil crisis. That is why G7 has been formed. The developed nations has been formed. So in 1997 also there is a Asian financial crisis that impacted countries, especially Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Philippines. These are the countries that are affected in this financial crisis. That is why then these countries thought about why we don't have representation, like countries like G7 that take important decisions regarding economy. So these countries thought, which are affected by this Asian financial crisis, like members of Southeast Asia, Philippines, these countries are developing economies since 1997. India is also developing economy. So these countries thought, why not have a grouping like G7 where they make policies regarding world economy, where they discuss economic issues, world issues. So that is why G7 have been expanded to G20 in 1997. So this was a ministerial level forum. So it consists of not only leaders, like G7 have members of leaders as a part of its annual meeting. The prime minister or presidents will be a part of meetings in G7, but this here in G20, ministers like finance ministers will discuss about issues. So it emerged after G7 invited both developed and developing economies. So what happened is this, they developed the idea we should also have representation. So G7 expanded to G20. It means G20 have members of G7. So the all the members of G7 like Canada, Italy, Germany, US, UK, etc., they have representation in G20 as well. So G7 plus other 13 form the G70. The finance ministers and central bank governors began meeting in 1999. So it's a financial crisis. That is why the finance ministers and central bank governors, because the crisis is affecting all the nations. If one country is in crisis, all the other dependent countries where exports and imports will grow from one country to other country, they also get impacted. The whole world will be affected because of recession in one country. That is why this G20 consists of other countries representation which add to G7, and they have finance ministers and central bank governors. So it is majorly, it formed for the as a reaction to global financial crisis. So we can say it also formed to rescue world economy, to see the world finances and trade. So in financial 2008 financial crisis, what happened is the world saw the need for a new consensus building at the highest political level. It was decided that G20 leaders would begin meeting once annually. So at the time of 1997, they have been decided this grouping of G20, which adds to G7, it will be for only economy. So they discuss about economic affairs. That is why they have representation from finance and central bank governors. But in 2008 financial crisis, what happened is they also decided with all the members consensus. It means consensus means agreement with all the members. They have decided, all the leaders of G20 nations, it means prime ministers or presidents, they will also meet annually. So we'll discuss how G20 works. G20, the finance track. It means first why they formed in 1997, how finance ministers and central bank governors attended. That is called finance track. So they discuss about finance track means it is a platform. So they discuss about monetary, physical issues and financial regulations in the world. So the Sherpa track focuses on broader issues like political engagement, anti-corruption, development, energy, etc. So there is a task force that is called Sherpa. There is a finance that discuss about only financial issues. So why these groupings need to form? So majority we have been seeing in G20, majority 80% of world's nations, 85% of global trade, 75% of global investment will be a part of this grouping. Then why not already there are so many members. Then why not these decisions will not be taken in a more broader group like UN? There is an organization that have permanent secretary, that have permanent headquarter. So why not these decisions will be taken in UN? So the reason why these groupings have been formed amid there are organizations like IMF, World Bank, and UNS. There the decisions need to be taken uh, collectively. There is a legal binding force. It means each and every country need to implement and sign the agreement. Otherwise, no one country will follow the decision. If one country also doesn't agree, then they can't take decision regarding finances. So there is a huge procedures that will be going on while taking decisions. But in groupings like G7 and G20, they can informally they can just take the decisions informally with talking. They have common interest to develop the economy, so it is more easily convenient for these countries as a grouping. And most of the times all the countries, because all the countries have bilateral relations with each others, so they will actually implement the decisions. Even if one country doesn't implement the decision, it will not matter, it will not affect the grouping. It is not like UN where all the countries need to implement the decisions of UN. So that is what the main aim of this groupings. So the G20 members, here we will discuss. So here in the G20 members, there are members of G7 also. So first see what are the members of G7 here: US, UK, and Italy, Japan, France, Germany, etc. So France, Germany, Canada, Italy, Japan, US, UK. So these are the countries that are part of G7. So G7 members are also part of this group. The other 13 members are Argentina. Argentina is from South America. Australia, Brazil. Brazil is also from South America. So India is also a part of this G20, that we have to remember. Indonesia. So Indonesia is part of this, that is worst affected during Asian financial crisis, where there is a crisis for Asian countries. Republic of Korea is part of it, South Korea is part of it, Mexico is part of it, and South Africa. There is also representation from South Africa. So it is a broader group than G7. It has various representations of emerging economies as well. Turkey, Saudi Arabia from Middle Eastern countries was part of it, and also there is a representation from European Union, and there is a Russia also. So G7 there is no Russia. G8 there is a Russia, but G8 has been dormant after 2014, where Russia has been expelled. But in G20 there are these countries. So Spain as a permanent member, non-member invitee also attend leader summit. So Spain as a permanent in no permanent invitee. It is an invitee, but it is not an actual member. It will attend all the leader summit. So these 20 nations are important, but we should also remember Spain will attend the meetings. So the structure here is G20 presidency rotates annually according to a system that ensures regional balance over time. So for the selection of presidency, the 19 countries are divided into 5 groups, each having no more than 4 countries. So into four countries into 5. 5 fours are 20. So 4 countries in a group, they have been placed. And presidency, like annually, who will host this annual summit? That host will be rotated among these groups, among these 5 groups. From one group, one year there will be one presidency, other year the presidency will go to the other group of 20 members. So India is in group 2, which also has Russia, South Africa, and Turkey. So India is in the group 2, and G20 doesn't have a permanent secretariat or headquarters. This is a common point for groupings. They don't have permanent secretariat or headquarters. Trioca, every year when a new country takes on It works hand in hand with the previous presidency and next presidency, and this is collectively known as Troika. This ensures continuity and consistency of group's agenda. You need not remember this Troika name. Suppose if a country is taking presidency, India is taking presidency, then it will collect, then it have individual representations from or ambassadors that are assigned. So India works with what the presidency, previous presidency and the future presidency, or previous country that hosted G20 meeting and future country that will host G20 meeting. That is how they'll fix the agendas on what topics that the countries need to discuss. This is how they work. It is how the functioning of G20 is. So the cooperation, the work of G20 members is supported by several international organizations that provides policy advice. So these organization includes Financial Stability Board, which was established by G20 leaders following the onset of global financial crisis. So Financial Stability Board is established by G20 members. So when there is a global financial crisis in 1997, this Financial Stability Board is appointed by G20 leaders to work towards global finances. So ILO also supports G20, IMF supports, and OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, UN, World Bank, World Trade Organization, all these support these G20 members. So important decisions that are taken by G20 will also reflect in the policies of this IMF, World Bank, UN, etc. So this World Bank, UN also help in giving important policy advisors or important advisors to these G20 nations as well, because they consist of majority countries in the world. So the issues addressed by G20 are, they discuss about financial markets, for that is why they have been formed. They discuss about tax and fiscal policies in G20 nations. They discuss about agriculture, employment, energy, corruption, women in job market, climate change, global health, anti-terrorism, inclusive partnerships, so etc. They, whatever the issues that are concerning for the world, they discuss that. Not only financial issues for which they formed, they discuss about all the issues like poverty, malnutrition, hunger, etc. Because whatever they discuss, they have huge say in other organizations like IMF, World Bank, UN, etc. So if there are priorities that India had in G20, because G20 India is also a part of G20. So checking tax evasion to fight corruption. I have discussed before, tax evasion is one thing that we have to do with developed nations, because their MNCs or their companies that they set up in India, they doesn't pay taxes. So because of double taxation avoidance agreement, there is a huge advantage for these MNCs, because they can pay, because there is a double taxation avoidance. That is, you cannot pay two times taxes in both the countries, from their mother country from where they started and where they have set up their subsidiary in other country like India. So these countries, what they do is they set up shell companies in low tax paying economies like Mauritius, Seychelles, etc., these islands. And what they do is they pay taxes there. That is, those taxes are very low, like 0.5%, where in India where taxes are like 15%. So there is a huge gap, and they doesn't pay taxes. That is why we want laws regarding those tax evasion, because we also want taxes, because we need to distribute that tax proceeds to reduce poverty, to reduce inequality. So we need to fight that corruption, tax corruption that is done by MNCs of these developed nations. And we want to stop the terror funds. There is a money laundering, so we have to stop that. We can stop that terror funds only with the cooperation of the developed nations and all countries that are present in G20. So we have to cut the cost of remittances. Remittances means nationals of one country actually working in other country, they send their incomes to their mother countries. Like from India, there are many people from Kerala, they go and work in Middle Eastern nations. So whatever they have earned, they'll send the money from that Middle Eastern nations like Saudi Arabia, they'll send the money to India. That money we will call them as remittances. They will send because they have families here, so they work there. That is how they send these remittances. So we want to cut the cost of that remittances. So if a member need to send money, they have to pay some costs, they have to pay some fee. So we need to cut the cost of that remittances. So market access for key drugs, so we have to we have to be given patent waivers. So they should not be patent on key drugs, because majority of drugs are manufactured by the developed nations of UK and US. So they have to they have to give advantage to India so that India can manufacture these drugs. So they have to take out the patent norms that these countries are giving for original inventors of various drugs. So reforms in WTO is also needed. So WTO means World Trade Organization. We want reforms in WTO organization as well for its effective functioning and full implementation of Paris Agreement. So I have told before, Trump withdraw from this Paris Agreement to limit the global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. So they have to contribute, developed nations need to contribute towards Paris Climate Fund in this Paris Agreement. That is why US President doesn't want this to implement this Paris Agreement. But we as a not developed nation, we are emerging and developing nation, we want full implementation of this Paris Agreement. So I hope you understood the difference between actual organizations like IMF, UN, and the groupings like G7, G8, and G20. So you have to understand the differences between G7, G8, G20, and the members, how they have been formed, what are their priorities. So this is what the G7, G8, and G20 is about. I hope you understood the differences and priorities of these groupings. Thank you.